co-op. That means I do special education. And so it's good to see you all here this morning. I'm acquainted with some of you, not so much with others of you, but no matter what our level of acquaintance, the very first thing that I want to say to you this morning is thank you. Thank you for everything that you do each and every day on behalf of our students, our staff, and our families. You are instrumental in the work we do. We can't serve children if you can't get them to our door. And so I very much, can you guys hear me?
No.
No. You can't? No. Really? Oh my gosh, I'm an old teacher. I really thought. Okay. Now let's see. Here. Hello. There? Yes? Now you can hear me? Okay. I think I'm one of the loudest people in the world, so, okay, here we go. Is that better? Okay, so, again, let me get back to where I was at, and I want to, again, just thank all of you for everything you do. We don't have an opportunity to thank you enough, and there really are not enough words, or even the right words to, again, show and extend our appreciation for the work that you do, because, again, without you, we wouldn't be able to get to provide the services, to provide everything that we do for kids every day. So I want to make sure that I take the time to do that and appreciate you. I'm also thankful that Kathy did not put me between you and your breakfast. I'm like, no, let the people eat. I'm like, I do not want to come up here and talk about the student privacy piece without people having the opportunity to eat. But we are going to talk a little bit about student privacy or confidentiality as it applies to all staff, and then we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit about how it applies to those of you that work for our transportation department. Okay. There we go. So let's talk a little bit first of all about just what I hope you learn after we go through today's information. And so first of all, I want you to become familiar with the basic tenets or ideas from the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to be talking about FERPA. We use a lot of acronyms in special education, in education in general. And so I wanted to make first and foremost, wanted to make sure that you knew what that stood for. FERPA is sort of like HIPAA. How many of you are familiar with HIPAA and have had to sign the form at the doctor's office, right? This is sort of like the educational side, if you will. It protects student records, and we're going to get into more details there in a bit. You'll also learn about how FERPA applies to you as transportation personnel, because if you are an employee of the school district, you bear this same responsibility. And if you didn't know that before today, then I'm glad we had the opportunity to have this conversation so you'll feel better prepared in the future. We'll also talk about forms of protected information and identify some examples of what's called legitimate interest, because we talk about that a lot. Who has a legitimate interest to know? Who can know this stuff? And why is it so top secret? So we'll be talking a little bit about that. We'll also talk about general responsibilities and limitations of this work. We'll want to make sure that you become familiar with your obligation to safeguard information. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the consequences to the district if someone like myself fails to do what they need to protect information. I think the other thing that's important that you hear from me is we're all human beings in this room, and that includes me. And you need to know that I have accidentally violated FERPA over my career. It wasn't intentional. It was literally with the touch of a keystroke of send, okay, on my computer. And what I had done is I had accidentally, in Google email, selected the wrong Brian and sent a student record to the wrong Brian, and it went to someone outside of the school district. I got lucky because that other Brian was actually another school administrator in another district, and I was able to work with him very quickly to acknowledge that I had made an error and that he had received information he should not have received. But I was very transparent in my violation with that family. I told them what I had done on what date I had done it, who I had sent it to, and what I had included in error. And then I explained to them how we would try to prevent that error in the future. Okay, so you're a human being. I am too. Okay, so unless you are running around intentionally sharing information that you should not, if we make an error, we admit it, we try to fix it and prevent it from happening again, and then move on. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But I think it's important that you know that. Last one. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, just want to talk with you a little bit about making sure that you can understand FEB. First of all, it was enacted in 1974, and this is again is kind of like that HIPAA piece. It just grants parents and eligible students the right to access and control their educational records. And what does it protect? Well, the law says it protects education records, grades, transcripts, and personally identifiable information, okay? Things such as identification of disability, okay, are included in that. FEB applies to all educational institutions, so it's not just Mays. If you've ever interacted at the college level, you as a student were protected at that level as well. Okay, if I enroll in a class at the university, even at my age, I'm still protected by FEB, just like I'm protected by HIPAA on the medical side. Any questions about that so far? So you might be thinking, okay, but how does this apply to me? I'm not a teacher, I'm not a para. How does this apply to me? Well, again, it applies to transportation personnel in the school setting because you too are privy to important protected student information. So let's talk about specifically what that might include. It includes any personally identifiable information. And parenthetically here, I gave you some examples. Names, addresses, student identification numbers, again, whether or not that student is eligible for special education. So maybe you know that Christy has a diagnosis of ADHD. And maybe you need to know that in order to do your job and carry out your professional responsibilities. But guess what? Not everybody else in this room that doesn't work with Christy has the right to that information, okay? It also includes communication with school staff and then the responsibility to safeguard information, okay? So as transportation personnel, as school personnel, all of us share in the responsibility to protect access to information, personally identifiable information, anything that we're communicating with school staff or safeguarding student information. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but for instance, just because I had a conversation with one of you with regards to a student and what they need in terms of being safe on the bus, doesn't mean that that's information that you can then sit at the ball field on a Friday or a Saturday night and visit with a neighboring personnel about where everyone else can overhear that, because it again means that we're communicating information about that student that's protected to people who have no need to know. And the hard part is sometimes you're like, well, we're all one big family, and I agree with that. But guess what? Again, unless you need to know that information about me, unless you personally will be working with me or on the rotation to be working with me, you don't get to know that specific information about me, okay? And I think if you kind of put it in the context of your own personal health or family-related information, it's kind of like not everybody gets to know your business, right? Okay. So identifying protecting information, what am I talking about? So academic records, disciplinary records, sometimes you might have some access to some pieces of that. Attendance records, any information, again, that could be used to identify a specific student falls under this act. And so again, it's not just limited to names, but also addresses, social security numbers, student ID numbers. So some information, even such as a student's bus route or schedule, could in some instances be considered under FERPA if it identifies the student. Okay, so it's all about, can it lead me back to knowing that that's Christy that we're talking about? And if it does, if those markers and that information leads it back to, well, that can't be anybody but her, then that's personally identifiable student information. Okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about responsibilities and limitations. So transportation personnel are responsible, again, for ensuring this during the course of their duties. All school personnel, again, we've kind of talked about that, sometimes I get ahead of myself, must adhere to strict protocols for handling that information. And again, we kind of hit on this, I'm not going to go back over this too much, but I just underlined here, again, only certain people get to know this information, and it's those who have a legitimate interest. Okay, so let's talk about legitimate interest, because this is a question I get a lot. Who has a legitimate interest? It refers to a specific valid reason for accessing that student's records. In short, you have to know the information in order to be able to do your job, okay? If you don't need that information to be able to carry out your core responsibilities as a transportation personnel, then you don't have reason to access that information, okay? It's about that genuine need to know the information in order to fulfill your responsibilities. And so interest would typically apply if they need access to that student information in order to carry out, for instance, a healthcare plan. Some of you have kids that carry EpiPens, or have a seizure disorder, or have asthma. I mean, there are a whole continuum, right, of things. That would be an example of where you have a legitimate interest to know as both driver and or if you are support personnel on the bus and you must assist that student during a medical crisis of some sort, then you have legitimate interest to know. Let's flip it to more of the instruction or the behavioral side. Perhaps you have a student on the bus that has a behavior intervention plan, sometimes also called a FEB. Again, we love our acronyms in education, but a behavior intervention plan. Remember, the school day starts when the student steps on your bus. They become the school's responsibility. There's actually something in law that talks about that you bear the responsibility, right, of the parent once they step into our world, into our bus. And so at that point, you would have the right to know more and need to be trained in terms of how to carry out any behavioral supports that the team, the IEP team, decided that that student needed on the bus. I'm going pretty quickly, but I'll leave time for questions, I promise. Okay, so here's some examples that I wanted to give you, some concrete examples of legitimate educational interest. Okay, so the first one is assigning bus routes. Would somebody be willing to read that one out loud to the group? Thank you.
Assigning bus routes?
Yes, would you read the
Transportation personnel may need access to student records, such as home addresses or special transportation needs, in order to assign bus routes to ensure that students are transported safely and efficiently.
Okay, so that's one example of the type of information, and this is not intended to be all-inclusive, but I'm trying to give you some concrete examples. Okay, so that's one example of where you might have legitimate interest to know things that other people wouldn't in terms of making the service available to that student. Who'd like to share the ensuring student safety one? Come on, I just need another brave soul. Yes, thank you.
In emergency situations or situations requiring medical assistance, transportation personnel may need access to student information to ensure the safety and well-being of students while they're being transported.
Okay, so there's again asthma, EpiPen, epilepsy. Again, the list goes on and on, right, in terms of, but some of you have the need to know that Christy has asthma. Most of you in the room probably don't need to know that Christy has asthma, because you're not on her rotation, you're not in her immediate circle, kind of circle of trust, right? Of people that need to know that about her in order for her to safely access her school site. How about communication with school staff? You need to know I taught first grade. I have a really long wait time. Thank you.
Transportation personnel may need to communicate with school staff about student transportation needs or issues. Access to student information may be necessary to facilitate these communications and address any concerns effectively.
Behavior, 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 right? So this is an example of where you may need either communication from instructional coaches, and some of you've worked with our instructional coaches. You may need to work with the principal, or more likely probably the teaching staff, with somebody who has some pretty significant behavior needs. You're going to be brought into a circle of trust in terms of information about that particular student and what their needs are, so that you can be a part of the larger team meeting the needs of that student and safely getting them to school. But again, not everybody in this room, nor your friend in the stands on Friday night, gets to know that information, okay? And then the last one, compliance with transportation policies. Need one more brave soul to share. Thank you.
Transportation personnel may need to access student records to ensure compliance with transportation policies and procedures, such as verifying eligibility for transportation services or addressing disciplinary issues related to student behavior on the bus.
Yeah, Kathy was showing you guys kind of a scenario from another school district when I walked in. Glad that's not us, hope that's not us. But sometimes you're going to be brought in or have access to information related to disciplinary issues. For instance, Christy hits you on the bus and needs to be suspended from the bus for a couple of days, right? Then as her driver or her support personnel, you're made aware that Christy has been disciplined. Again, Kathy, my neighbor from the neighborhood, can't learn that at a football game. It's none of her business. And for most of you in the room, you also can't know that Christy got kicked off the bus. Sounds like interesting, juicy topic to talk about in the staff room. Don't do it, okay? Think about if it was your own kid, your own family member, whether or not you want all of them to have that information. Okay, so safeguarding information. So it's our responsibility as school personnel to keep the information you have safe. And one of the things that Tony, Kathy, Chris, Joy, and I are talking about, hey Tony, it's like you knew, you came walking on in. So, like on cue. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how to better safeguard, like make the information accessible to you, but then also make sure that it's properly safeguarded in terms of either it has to be transported in and out of the bus every day, like if it's hard copy and then kept locked up because it can't just be left out. For instance, we can't let the cleaning staff that comes through here have access to that information, or whether or not we want to use some sort of electronic means and password protect that information. But in any case, it's got to be securely stored in some fashion. And then when communicating about students, we want to be discreet and use encrypted or password protected forms of communication. So we've talked about, how can we identify for people that need to know that there's a particular need that this student has without, again, divulging that to others that don't necessarily have that same educational interest. And then making sure that we have protocols, and this is something we continue to work on district-wide, making sure, again, that we have protocols that authorized personnel are granted access, and those that don't have ready access to that information. This is something we're continually striving to improve upon district-wide. It's not just limited to transportation. The population is increasingly diverse. The need is increasingly growing, in terms of the students that we serve. And so again, making sure that we are doing our best to communicate that information that needs to be shared, but again, doing it in a way that's easily accessible, usable, but doesn't divulge things when it doesn't belong there. So, all right. So potential consequence of violating FERPA really will come back to the district. We could lose funding. Trust me, that's not a place that we want to be in right now, particularly where we're at in terms of funding for both general education and special education in the state of Kansas. And so there can be action taken against us by other departments at the federal level, because this is federal legislation, if we fail to follow this. Not to mention then just the reputation that we like to uphold. And again, let's treat our students the way we would want to treat our own children, our own family members. And then the other piece is just eroding trust within the school community. So when you violate this, you potentially erode trust with the students that I know you love and enjoy serving, and then you lose the trust of their family. And earning that back is very difficult. But again, it's not insurmountable if you make a mistake. Coming to one of us, coming to Kathy, coming to Chris, if you've made a mistake, letting them know so that we can own that up front and work with the family typically turns out much better than if we act like it didn't happen at all and they discover it on their own. Trust me. I've helped navigate that, and again, that's why I told you at the beginning, if you do, I've done it. It happens. We're human beings. It's okay. We'll work through it with you. And then finally, just making sure that all school personnel understand the serious of FERPA and the failure to comply. At the end of the day, just remember, at whatever information you have, there's a little human being at the center of that information. Okay. So let's look at a quick scenario. And how am I doing? Am I taking too much time today? Okay. So a parent calls the transportation office requesting information about the students who ride a specific bus route. Nice parent. Okay, new to the community. Hi, I'm Jan. I'm new here. I hear you're the bus driver. And they explain they've recently moved to the area and they want to know if the other students in the neighborhood, if there are other students in the neighborhood who take the same bus as their child. Turn to a neighbor and talk about how you might respond to this parent. Take just 60 seconds to talk with the neighbor.
We got bad
Okay. Oh, no. I'm almost done, so.
I had a couple of years ago.
I do want to give you a chance to questions.
All my new one.
If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. Thank you. All right. So here's the response, or here's some thoughts about that response. Okay, remember, as transportation personnel, you now understand the shared responsibility that you have with me to protect this information. And so, instead of providing details to that parent, you can just politely explain that there are limitations in what you can share, right? You don't have to get into the whole FERPA verbiage. There's just, there are limitations. I care about your child, I care about others. And so assuring the parent that we take the Student Privacy Act very seriously, and we're not able to disclose that information, and then just provide them some more general, like you can still be helpful, right? But provide them general information about the bus route, pick up, drop off sites, locations, and here's the thing. that mama will find other resources in the neighborhood to figure out what's going on. You don't need to be her person, okay? Trust me, I was that mama once, okay? So, all right. So I just want to remember today, if you take nothing else away, just remember that you play a really critical role, and we thank you. And you're also a big part of helping us as a team protect our student data and the privacy under the FEB regulations. So with that being said, I know that's kind of dry content, but I want to give you the chance to ask any questions that you might have, because this also tends to be kind of a hot topic. Okay, now here's the part where it gets, you have to hold the microphone. I know, you made me hold the microphone? Okay.
Yeah, we're bus drivers, we can be heard.
If you have kids coming from another bus to your bus, are we not able, as a parent, to ask them any questions about that kid?
Okay, so tell me a little bit more. So the question she asked is if as a paraprofessional, you have kids coming to your bus from another bus?
Because we don't always have the same kids here every year. Is there any way that we can talk to the other driver to find out information on that kid that we need to know?
Sure, so it's okay for there to be like what I will call transitional meetings, where you pass the torch from year, like last year into this year. But what will be difficult for you is any new information, once you pass the baton, it's hers to keep. And what becomes difficult, because you form relationships with these little people and these families, and you genuinely care, and sometimes you'd like to know that Johnny had surgery, but if you're not in the direct circle of Johnny anymore, you don't get to have those important updates. So it's okay to have the transitional meeting or say, hey, tell me more about what worked well with Johnny last year, that as new information is forthcoming. That's what I find is the hardest, and it happens with our teachers all the time, because those kids become their own after a year. And I know you feel the same way, and I did too. But you have to trust once you pass the baton on to your colleague that they'll take whatever new information along with what you gave them and do the best they can in working with that school team and the family to meet the needs of that student. And you have to release.
We don't always have the same kids year after year. There's sometimes it's kind of nice to be able to ask them.
Yeah, it's okay to have an initial transition conversation. The other thing I would just warn you about is if someone comes to you and you're the current driver, but you're getting ready to hand that baton off, right? Don't feel like you have to be the keeper of all information. If you genuinely don't know, be honest and say, I don't feel best equipped to share that. Let's get you connected. Let's work with Kathy and Chris and get you connected back to the school-based team to see how they'd like you to proceed. Because again, you can't be everything to all kids any more than I can be, okay? And so I'll give you kind of this analogy. My oldest daughter is now 25, and I no longer have the need to know about her personal medical information. Her decisions are hers to make. So you do have, it doesn't mean I care about her any less, and sometimes she chooses to share with me, right? But I no longer have the right to know all that information. That baton has been passed on to her as the adult. It's kind of the same scenario when the child transitions to another driver, another team of transportation personnel. They become the holders of that information and any new updates. Okay? Other questions? You guys were so attentive, thank you. Or hungry, I don't know. It's like, no other questions about transportation and FERPA?
They know it all.
Good job. Again, on behalf of Dr. Greer and the rest of our leadership team, thank you again for all that you do, and really and truly, you help us make a difference. We appreciate you.
If you want another piece, hello, you can go ahead and go up and get another piece if you want to, while we shift back over here. I think you took my laptop here. That doesn't look like mine.
I just wanted you to answer my emails. Just kidding, I really don't want your job. Oh, and here, yours too. I'm gonna take all your stuff.
So while we are getting breakfast, huge thank you out to Vermillion for getting breakfast for us. I think it's the first time we've had breakfast pizza all year. Tomorrow is Final Friday, so we'll be out cooking. I hope it's nice tomorrow, better than today. We're making red velvet pancakes for yesterday, if you will, and bacon. So it'll be a good breakfast tomorrow. You don't want to miss it.
Look a little deeper, then things start.
All right, we're going to keep moving while you guys go through the line. I want to get you guys out of here. February, we're already halfway through the month. And in case you haven't started the countdown, not that I have, but we're at 58 days left of school year. Talking about Final Friday tomorrow. Next week, Thursday and Friday, we don't have school. Thursday, if you are a para or a minibus driver, I believe, I'll talk with Dr. Skelton to find out for sure. If you want to attend that meeting, you're welcome to. It's paid day. Right now, are you turning me off? Hello? Oh, there I am. I was getting quiet. So if you would like that extra day of pay paras, I would highly suggest you come in on the 22nd. I'll show you a calendar here in just a minute of what that looks like. Yes, sir. Do you have a question? It is highly encouraged. It is not mandatory, but it's just shy of not being mandatory. So you do not have to be here. Michelle, I think she went to the last one, didn't you? And said it was really, really good. It was well worth going to. It's a full 8-hour day, so. Yes. You sure can if you want to. It's totally up to you. Subs, since you do para, you're also welcome to if you're a CDL driver. Just because you're a CDL driver doesn't mean you don't get to go if you want to. Okay? It's good training for anybody that deals with sped kids.
Is it here?
Our training is here. Yes, it'll be in this building. Next month, we are on break, spring break, on the 15th for our meeting. So we'll have our safety meeting on the 7th, which is the last school day before we take break. Notice that we are off Friday before break, so we actually get